And I started thinking about all my favorite things to read when I was studying were these collections of little ethnographies written by different anthropologists sharing their kind of field work. And so that was kind of my North Star for this when Alex approached me. I started thinking like we could use this idea of eating on the road and present it sneakily like a collection of little ethnographies.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Today in the show, I have such a great conversation with Alex Bleeker and Luke Pyenson. Alex of the band Real Estate, Luke used to play in Frankie Cosmos. These are musicians writing about music and food and the collision on the road. They've written a terrific book called Taste in Music, and I so enjoyed talking to them about what food is really like on tour, why food in America and food in Europe is so different at music venues, and we get into so many of the essays and interviews that they've included, including a memorable piece by Chris Franz of the Talking Heads. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Alex Bleeker and Luke Pyenson, welcome to This is Taste. How are you doing?
Pretty good. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about this book. I've read half of it, admittedly. I'm leaving the other half to savor.
I appreciate that you're being honest.
We have a lot to cover. It's a terrific book. It's about food on the road. That's the general remit, but there's so much more. Road meaning a touring band. It's full of essays and observations and some interviews. But first, I'll start with you, Alex. You know, when you come back to New York, you used to live here, and you live on the West Coast now. Where are you going?
I had lunch at one of my new haunts, today. I've been staying just by nature of where friends live, and I have whatever free places to crash and stuff in Chelsea, which is not a place that I frequented or hung out very often when I lived here. I lived in Greenpoint. It was very much the North Brooklyn wave of DIY music jumping to less DIY music. And so I would mostly when I lived here, just kind of eat and hang in Brooklyn and Queens predominantly. And now I'm always sort of in Lower Manhattan. So I have different spots that I like to go to. But that said, last night when I got in, and please help me because I know you guys are going to know this place, and I always forget the name, and I'm going to butcher it, so I don't even want to say it, but there's this incredible 24-hour Cuban diner on 14th Street. What is it?
Oh, Capelia?
Capelia, yeah.
And, so I went there as soon as I got in last night because this is the kind of thing that I think about with New York is I live in a very small town. You're lucky if you can get something to eat that you don't prepare yourself after 8:30 p.m. I am a night owl.
Yeah.
I like to be up late. I'm like, New York City, I can walk. I got a pulpo and chorizo sandwich with an excellent cocktail at 12:30 a.m. on a Monday, and the place was more than half full.
It's cool, right?
I'm in heaven. So it's a lot about vibrational energy for me as much as it is about food. It's this is what makes me feel like I'm back.
Where are you at
New
now
York.
in the West Coast? What's the small town?
I live in a little tiny town called Bolinas, which is outside of San Francisco.
Oh,
it's a cool, storied sort of poet surfer town.
Yeah, but there's no 8 p.m. dining options, you're saying?
I mean, there's there are a couple good restaurants around. 9 p.m. is as late as anybody's going to be
the max,
open.
Right. I relate. I moved to the Hudson Valley and my town shuts down as well. So after living in New York for 20. Luke, you are living here in the city and always going out. We've shared many meals or a couple meals, and I feel like there'll be more meals to come. Where are you out right now, dining out?
Let's see. I mean, actually, I've been cooking a lot lately because I'm going to be away a lot this fall. So I've been trying to really eat at home as much as possible. But, my meal of the summer was at Union Square Cafe.
Yeah.
Gotta be honest.
There's no gotta be. It's fucking good.
It's
man.
a good restaurant.
Dude,
it is rock solid. And it's as rock solid as ever.
Yeah, I went in February and I talked about on the show. It is really good right now. There's a relatively new-ish chef there, and she's fantastic. And it's always so crowded with tourists, and that's fine.
No, it's fine. It's a good vibe in there. The food is dependable, excellent, and as you know, gluten-free stuff is a newly important thing to me and my wife. And they have an off-menu homemade gluten-free bread that is the best I've had since she was diagnosed with celiac. So, yeah,
I love that you can share that with Lauren, and I'll link to the show notes a piece, Luke, you wrote about your partner's journey to a diagnosis of celiac and going gluten free. It's a terrific piece.
Thank you.
Love that. So, Tasting Music, your book it's an absolute success. It's a tricky book to write and edit. Food and music. The crossover has been kind of as old as the internet, and I remember doing interviewing chefs about their favorite music and fun conversations for us as writers, but oftentimes for the reader, it's not good. I'm guilty of that. It's just, it doesn't really hit in the way it should. It feels like that you're forcing two things together that don't really fit. But your book is the opposite. It's a very literary collection of essays that account that give an account of food on the road through voices of many bands, and we'll go over some of the specific stories. I'll start with you, Alex. And how did the two of you come to the conclusion that a book was needed for food on the road for bands?
It's really funny because this combination felt just like so inevitable to me for so many years. And obviously there have, different people have kind of published different things, combining these two elements, music and food. Not exactly in this way before that, we had seen, but just from my own personal experience of touring, like it always felt inevitable to me. And I sort of had this idea for the book for like a decade, but was kind of like, I was living in this state of mind that was like, someday somebody else is going to make the perfect music food book and I'm going to say, I had that idea. It's this classic sort of frame of mind that we get into. And Luke was a person that I had discussed the idea of the book with for a long time. We met on tour together. Our bands, Real Estate and Frankie Cosmos, toured together, and that's very much the basis of our relationship. And then within the basis of that relationship, it became very much based on food recommendations. Luke, people should know, is one of the greatest resources for that on planet Earth, as far as I'm concerned. I learned that immediately on tour, and I utilize that to this day. And so our relationship was largely based on that. There's one particularly memorable night where both of our bands were in Madrid playing the same festival, and we went on kind of a tapas crawl together, which was just like really extraordinary. So this was just kind of kicking around, but to me, I will say, I have to give Luke credit where it's due. It always felt more like a guidebook as I was imagining it. Yeah. Like musicians, we're an untapped food travel resource. And I wrongly assumed when, you've read half of the book, now that for everybody had the same approach as me when on tour, which is like, this is great. I'm traveling everywhere. What am I going to do? I'm going to find the best thing to eat possible in every city obsessively, which is not everybody's relationship at all to eating on tour. But I just figured, hey, we go everywhere. There are people like Luke and I who obsess about where to eat wherever we go. Utilize us as a resource. We'll have like a fun guide. It was somewhat unlimited in scope in my imagination. It was like Bruce Springsteen's Jersey Dives. It was like a little cheesy in my mind looking back. And then, but I went to Luke. It was just very much a pandemic project and was like, let's make the book. And Luke really, Luke said yes, but I think it has more of an editorial, more softly anthropological approach.
Yeah, so Alex caught me at this moment. This was winter 2020 into 21, when I had started to kind of re-engage with this community around my grad program, which was in the anthropology of tourism. And my advisor had started convening these like Zooms during lockdown. And it had been like 8 years since I was studying that. And I was like attending these Zoom lectures, getting in this headspace of like, maybe I want to go back to school. I'd always kind of in the back of my head thought like an academic study of touring musicians was something I could kind of see in my future, maybe. And I started thinking about all my favorite things to read when I was studying were these collections of little ethnographies written by different anthropologists sharing their kind of field work that always bounced around from like different parts of the world, different little, just these like snapshots of people's lives around the world, all united around a central theme. And so that was kind of my North Star for this. When Alex approached me, I started thinking like we could use this idea of eating on the road and present it sneakily like a collection of little ethnographies. And because it's pop culture, it's not going to be dry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just had this, I'm a food journalist. I have reported stories from the road. I had never really combined those two parts of my life before. because I always kind of thought, like, who cares?
Well, my point exactly at the
Yeah.
intro is like, who does care?
Exactly.
We care because we're in it, and I used to write about music as well and food, and like we have
Right.
passion for these topics. But no, the general.
But then I wrote this piece in winter 2020 about, well, I wrote a recipe in a piece. This was for the Washington Post about a type of Czech pickled cheese. It's not actually pickled, but usually it's translated as pickled, called nakladani hermelin. And it's like a camembert-style cheese that is submerged in paprika-tinged oil with white onion and some other spices for like a week or more till it gets funky. And it was first shown to me by our tour manager, David, a Czech guy who we became very close with. He was our tour manager and driver every time we toured in Europe. And at that stage of the pandemic, people were starting to think about touring musicians a little differently. Like a little bit more attention was being paid to, hey, there's this whole population of people who are out of work right now and sitting at home. And what does the shutdown mean for live music, for all types of live entertainment? And I think musicians were starting to be seen like a little bit more three-dimensionally maybe than usual, not just this like rock and roll stuff. So I wrote this piece where, I kind of talked about making that at home, making the cheese at home, thinking about our Czech crew, how the shutdown is affecting people like that, not just the musicians, but the crew, everybody involved in live music. And I started thinking, I'm sure there are tons of other musicians who can go deeper than just recommending places or just like, this is the sickest taco I ever had at South by. Like, there's got to be deeper, more emotional, more human stories that can be told.
And you really had the editorial instinct as well, with that impulse, from the piece, but also you knew that there were writers out there and you could edit them.
Absolutely. And a big goal of this project is to really just open up food and travel writing to kind of some fresh voices and just not gatekeep, because there's so many people who can write beautiful pieces about these, super relatable themes.
I think that something that's maybe different about this book is that we were uniquely suited to initiate these conversations, both because of our personal Rolodexes. Hey, who are your friends that you've met on tour that might want to talk about this kind of thing? And it snowballed from there. But also to, have these sort of unguarded, deep conversations with musicians because we have lived and shared that experience ourselves. So, we recorded pretty much all of the initial calls that we had for this book. And if you go back and listen to them, sure, we're sort of guiding people and finding certain angles to write about. It was much easier than we even expected. People were really keen to talk about this. But it's sort of therapeutic among Luke and I and everybody else who's on the call. It's much more conversational, than just like, hi, we want you to write about this book. What are you going to write about something for this book? What are you going to write about? It's just like, it felt very comfortable and natural. And I think there's this sort of familiarity with somebody who's like kind of been out on the road and knows what the lifestyle is.
You two are the only folks who could write this book, and many food writers who dabble in music writing have tried to do it. And clearly the empathy shines through with all of the contributions, and we're going to get to several examples. But I want to first start with pieces that you each wrote. And listeners, the format of the book is really unique in that there is an essay or an interview from a guest, but both Alex and Luke give a nice chunky intro to the piece, and that's cool because it shows your voice, and you guys both obviously can write. And Alex, I'll start with you. You had a really terrific essay about body image, which I think is a topic that many musicians, live performers, theater actors, many folks who are performing in front of thousands of people have, and you're very candid. And I want to get a sense about this scene that you write about. You're in your hotel room after a show, and you're looking at yourself on Instagram. And I think any public figure, or anybody who does public speaking, can relate. And it was really meaningful to me, and I believe many. So what inspired you to write about this?
Thanks for saying that. I mean, a lot of, it's probably the most unguarded moment in the book for me personally. It felt really good to write. I think I was inspired by the time that I wrote that chapter introduction that talks about my own struggles with body image, dysmorphia, compulsive overeating, weight gain, all that stuff that I love to eat on the road, but being on tour brings all of that to the forefront for me, absolutely, was because so many other musicians had been vulnerable with us, and I started to get an idea about what was possible and what this book could really explore. And now I was fully in and on board to go to a sort of greater depth than like, I love these tacos at South by, which I do love, you know?
Yeah.
And
Torchies or Matt's? What are you doing?
yeah, there was a place called
Veracruz All
I do
Natural
like
for me.
Veracruz All Natural.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, there was a place where I used to go get these migas tacos in the morning. I think it was called like
Ninfa? And that's in Houston, sorry.
Oh, Ninfa's is good.
So ill. Yeah, so good. Yeah.
You see, this is easy. This part,
podcast.
yeah.
Alex, this is food podcasting.
Yeah.
I know you're used to music podcasting,
I know.
radio
I'm
interviews.
like, I'm on the spot here. Let's talk about some weird Captain Beefheart.
We're going to talk about broadcast later,
Yeah.
so we'll get into some deep cuts.
But you know, it's very real. It's still real for me. Just because I've written about it and I'm aware of it doesn't mean that it sort of goes away. I think we're living in a unique era. All of us are. Yes, we have press photos and things like that bands have been accustomed to for a long time, music videos, but seriously, after every show, and it's kind of part of the job now to go home and, you know, you see this if you follow any musician on tour, pretty much at any level. Here's the re-storied posts of the show that we played tonight, you know? And so in a way, it's part of my job to go look at and then repost those things just from a social media perspective. But giving people into a little window of like, I definitely judge a clip by how fat or thin I think that I look in a person, like probably beyond, if not equal to, like the way that the music sounds. And that just kind of affects my state of mind on tour because there's unhealthy food options around us on tour and in life all the time. So if I'm like looking at these constantly broadcast and rebroadcast images of my own body, and then I'm like, oof, you know, I definitely indulged a little too hard in that bin full of like the weird like Hershey's mix of like crackle bars and, you know, like just like random stuff.
Always going for the selects.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, like, it's like those little conversations that we're all forced to have with ourselves for better or for worse, you know? And I thought it might be, this is my own experience. I don't think I could possibly know what somebody who's femme or AFAB goes through on, you know, like it's probably a exponential factor more difficult or worse at just what I've heard. I don't know for sure. But I did think it might be powerful to have it because as like, you know, as somebody who identifies as male, we're often supposed to be like, oh yeah, I don't care about that, you know? And I don't think that's true either. So I thought it might be cool to have a male voice also talking about these issues because it's real for everybody.
Yeah, I was going to bring gender into the intro to why I liked it, and I think it is true that from the male point of view, it is in a more of a rarity to write about these issues, and it's cool how I think it's the second section is about health and wellness and the fact that this isn't just about the best meals. There are many best meals and best food experiences, but this touring that you do is naturally unhealthy. I mean, the lack of sleep, the alcohol if you do drink, the and of course the food. And I like that you both have decided to write a book that tackles the real health issues. Luke, do you feel when you were on the road, did you have moments where you're like, man, I'm feeling a little bit down right now?
Oh, man. I mean, well, first of all, like the experience that Alex writes about so beautifully in that chapter intro is I have the exact same experience that it really spoke to me on a personal level as well. But yeah, and I mean, for me, like, and Alex and I share this as somebody who was really kind of obsessively dedicated to sampling every regional delicacy in every single place that I ever visited on tour. And that, you know, isn't always necessarily the healthiest option, objectively healthiest option. It started to really have a pretty like deleterious effect on my health. And like, you know, in my retirement, so I don't tour anymore, as you know. In my retirement, I've taken up tennis and working out much more regularly. And it just, I don't know, I didn't have any time to do anything active on the road. So there was no counterbalance to all of the meals. And then you bring up sleep, like lack of sleep is a huge thing. If your sleep's not dialed in, forget about it.
You're never getting it. I mean, you're driving through the night. I want to stick with you, Luke. You know, your essay you write, or one of the essays, is you were gifted a persimmon in Japan, and you tell this great story about a fan, so to speak, who gives it to you. I want to hear about fans giving you food on the tour, both of you. It probably happens more than we would think, fans giving their bands that they're coming to some kind of food gift.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And actually, when Alex and I met on the first night of the Real Estate Frankie tour back in 2017, a fan had just given us a box of donuts. And actually, and it's a perfect thing to talk about actually right after what we were just talking about, because a fan gives us a box of donuts, and I'm like, fuck, like I don't want that near me. You know what I mean? Like it's constant of people being like, let's go get donuts, let's go get this, let's go get that. And I don't have the metabolism, frankly, to be able to just like do that every night for, 6 months out of the year.
I'm a sucker for it, though.
Yeah.
I'm never going to turn down a late night donut trip.
I mean,
that's the thing. It's really tough. So a fan gives us a box of donuts. It's thoughtful. I'm like, damn, now I got to figure out how to kind of like pretend to take a bite out of this and kind of like slink off while everybody else enjoys. But yeah, fans give us food a lot. The one you're referring to, and we'll put fan in air quotes because it was a colleague of my father's who came to our show in Tokyo and very patiently endured our set. And
you write about the not the terribleness, but the challenging nature of the music you were playing at the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just feel like he didn't like it. That's just my own thing. I just feel like I don't think he could have possibly liked it. And part of the essay is me kind of like imagining what the day might have been like for him leading up to this, like, oh shit, I have to go see my colleague's son's band.
Was he more of like a city pop fan, do you think?
Who knows? Yeah, I mean,
Definitely.
maybe I could have definitely chatted about city pop with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's wearing a suit, full Japanese salaryman get up, and waited till the end of the gig, found me outside our green room and gave me this box of exquisite hoshigaki, dried hachia persimmons, like very high quality, expensive, I came to learn, gift item. That really, what I write in the piece is that it's like a synecdoche for the entire like cultural heritage of Japan in that moment. It's so meaningful. It's such a distillation of the hospitality ethos of Japan. Like it meant so much more than just like a little wrapped persimmon in a box. And the fact that he, like I said, suffered through our set to have the chance to give that to me was really meaningful. It was really nice of him, and he basically just handed me the box and then bolted. Like we didn't really get to.
Well, you imagine in the
much.
piece about the effort he made carrying this heavy box from wherever he came from. It's a really nice image that you paint about how gifting culture works in Japan.
Yeah, it was a cool experience. It was really meaningful, and I'll mention another great example of a fan that this time it was an actual fan who, hey, maybe Masa-san became a fan that night. So I'll never know. Yeah. But there's an FC super fan named Paula who lives in Manila, and we went and played a festival in Jakarta that actually Alex is about to go play next month, right? Or in 2 months.
That's right.
This festival, Joyland, it's a fantastic festival. There's a huge indie culture in Southeast Asia, and Indonesia specifically is like a real hotbed. It's great. It's a cool destination to get to play in. And this fan flew from the Philippines to Indonesia to see us play, and she brought us each individual gifts. Such a fan that she kind of knows like what we're each into, and she brought me a beautiful Bina bar, dark chocolate bar with Philippines green mango. And yeah, it was really, really meaningful. As the drummer, like I want to say maybe the least well-known member of a kind of moderately well-known band, I wasn't the one receiving the gifts all the time, so it was very special that she had taken the time to get something specifically for me.
Alex, did you receive gifts yourself?
I was just thinking about all the sweet gifts that come in. It's often a sweet gift. I mean, Real Estate has a relationship with a couple of incredible super fans. Sometimes, fans become such big avowed fans that they actually become like, they get close enough to the band. Like if they're cool, and these guys are cool, they've always been supportive, and like they just bring us cookies at every available, we've come to expect, like Nick and Gloria are here, another batch of cookies, and they'll kind of like hang out in a Tupperware in the van for a couple days and tempt you, and they're always really good. But I was trying to think while Luke was talking, I was like, have I ever had savory gifts of food? And I thought of, and it's funny we talk about the crossover between food and music, because this guy, Sam, I met him as a music journalist. He was living in New York. He's Canadian, and one of many people who's taken great pains to extract the idea of the New York City bagel and bring it somewhere else.
Oh, yeah.
So he started an incredible bagel shop in Toronto called Primrose Bagels. Really good. Definitely would recommend it.
Yeah.
And he's so proud of these bagels. And they're doing really well. They're like, the bagel shop in Toronto now. And when we played Toronto, he came and like made an entire backstage bagel spread.
Oh, that's
for
ill.
us.
Like
And-
with all the spreads and some of the other things too.
And he at some point was like, they make this like incredible lox, this
Yeah.
like pastrami lox.
Oh,
They make all of their own cream cheeses. I take personal offense to the word schmear for some reason, though. That's I just don't love
Feels
it.
icky. Yeah,
I
it's
don't
not
love
great
it.
food
I don't
word.
love it. But
Yeah.
but a lot of that, he brought everything. He brought us a couple T-shirts. It was a really thoughtful, incredible gift because everybody in real estate is a big bagel appreciator. And I think at one point he was going to send me some, but he's like, no. I actually have to wait until you're in town. And he personally came and delivered them and set up a whole spread for us.
The
And that
bagel
was
is a
really
good
nice.
like post like midnight snack.
100%. I mean, I ate one both before and after the show, tying it back to what we, started this conversation.
Super
talking
good,
about.
man.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. So there are many pieces to talk about, and we don't have because I want to talk more about you guys, but we'll go over a couple of them, and one that I just absolutely love is Chris Franz talking about his time in the Talking Heads and being on tour with the Ramones. They also at the beginning he mentions the legendary CB's show that they played,
Mhm.
Talking Heads and Ramones co-headlined, or I guess the Talking Heads supported, which amazing show. But he writes about being in Paris and being out with the Ramones for a meal. And Luke, tell me a little bit about this piece and working with Chris Franz, who is quite a writer, a memoirist, etc.
Yeah, so Chris put out a memoir in 2020 called Remain in Love. That was fabulous. I read it right when it came out, read it in like a day. And he does write about that scene in a different way in his memoir. He talks about their first trip to Paris. And I remember reading it and thinking like, man, like even they had a first time in Paris, everybody had that, and we had that. I'm sure real estate had that. It's always memorable when you get to play in Europe for the first time, and specifically because Paris is such a special place, I think.
And mad for music too, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, our first show in Paris was exceptional. It was like one of the greatest nights of my life, and it was just so cool to hear such a legendary musician describe that same scenario. But Chris Franz is an important figure to me as well because, I don't think of Chris without thinking of his wife, Tina Weymouth, the bass player, Talking Heads. It's Chris and Tina. And I should say Tom Club, which, also unbelievable band. I am married to my former bandmate. A lot of people kind of first go to Fleetwood Mac when they hear that I dated a bandmate and then married my bandmate.
Not a great example.
Not a great
No,
example.
it doesn't have a great ending.
The great example is Chris and Tina. And like, what cooler music couple is there? So yeah, I really wanted to try to get him for this book. I thought it was a bit of a reach, to be honest. I didn't know how we were going to get in touch with him, but long story short, we were able to make it happen. He was incredibly gracious. Sent us a draft, like really quickly, and I just remember being so excited when that showed up in my
When that Word
inbox.
doc
I
came
was
up,
like,
yeah.
no way. I can't believe it.
There were a couple different Zoom calls that I like blew my mind in the process of making this
Yeah.
book, and that was one of them.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden we're like on a Zoom call with Chris Franz and his manager, and he's like, "Yeah, no, I think I can do this pretty quickly."
And I even
he was
said to him,
really easy.
I was
honestly.
like,
It's
man, you guys are the example. You and Tina are the blueprint. And he was, I was like, I'm married to my bandmate as well. He was like, good idea, man.
That's how those
Yeah.
sentences. I mean, were there some line edits involved, Luke? Are you offering him some keystrokes?
No comment. No, he needed a very light edit job.
He's
He
a
was-
light edit.
light
Chris
edit.
Brandt.
Yes, it
Yeah.
came in. It was fresh, clean copy. But yeah, I guess the only other thing I want to say about that piece is just that we really wanted to stay away from like rock star stuff in this book. We wanted to focus on kind of a different tier of
Yeah.
musician and a different maybe scene. However, given the opportunity, we weren't going to turn down the opportunity to work with an actual capital R, capital S rock star. And I think it enriches the book to have his perspective too.
Well, I want to talk about that because the book covers about 50 years of music history, and Franz is one of the older musicians, but there's some other ones too. But really, I think this book features a lot of artists who I would say, fall into this rough decade-long period of 2006 to 2016, this indie rock boom, which I think you both were part of and still are a part of. And really, this runs parallel with foodie culture and foodism and any word you want to call it. I hate all those terms, but you know what I'm saying, listener. And it aligns completely with the rise of food culture in America. And I think it's no secret that as music and indie was rising and artists were starting to get a little bit of scratch, foodism became another thing and people were starting to get into food, which is big air quotes. So Alex, tell me a little bit about this time period of your lives and being in music in that era, and then the rise of food culture, and how you were all kind of getting into food at the same time.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's been a really good time to go on tour as a person. It's just like I now feel you as like I'm about to say, as a person who enjoys food. Sometimes I'm like, I'd like to eat it every day, if I can.
No, 2 to 8 times a day, depending on
yeah, exactly. But as a person who is, there is no good way to say it. It's passionate about food, but we all know what we're talking about.
Food serious, forward. I've tried everyone on the show, and it doesn't work.
I dig food, man, and I like music. And, in that way, it's been like a rich time to go on tour because, like you say, there are people, as I've sort of aged, as the band has gotten older, the band has taken I'll say everyone in real estate shares this interest, so that's a win for us. Like, it's very important to us. It's, like, important to what we do on tour to, like, find a place to eat together before the show. Sometimes that's not always, like, the anatomically the best call, but we forego that. It's like, this is another word that I sort of hate, but it's about vibe,
Yeah.
And I've, like my friend Sam that I mentioned, who I met in the music space and now runs a great bagel shop. It's like we've all sort of matured together. We'll have chefs sometimes reach out and say, like, I know the band's coming through. We'd love to feed you guys.
Nice.
That kind of thing is really incredible. And it made me think of Mark Eibold's piece in the book with Michael Stern, who co-authored with his wife these books called Eat Your Way Across the USA and Road Food. And Mark Eibold, the bass player of Pavement, also played with Sonic Youth. I mean, pretty legendary stuff there.
I mean, I know Mark from more
bartending.
Bartending at Jones Street.
Yeah,
right. Great Jones.
Great Jones. Yeah.
I know Mark more from bartending at Great Jones Cafe and selling me a lot of shandies. Those were the fucking illest drinks.
Which really says it all, right?
Yeah.
So obviously they're a little bit older than us, kind of like right in the sort of the kind of formative indie rock period that birthed the one that I think real estate's a part of. Pavement, massive influence on us. I think that'd probably be obvious to any listener. But I'd say in a lot of the circles, at least that I mix in, obviously there's a lot of different perspectives in the book, but there are a lot of musicians who tour who are interested in eating while they tour and are into food. Mark says in his book that was not the case. The culture has changed a lot. Pavement was sort of this outlier that had this interest in seeking out interesting things to eat when they were on tour. He said most of his peers were happy to eat McDonald's and that was what was available, et cetera, et cetera. And so they actually utilized Michael's books in order to find, they would bring them on the road and sort of cross-reference them with their physical maps,
Yeah.
And so it was just really cool to have that perspective, of like, hey, in the 90s, we had to work much harder at this, and we have been and continued to be dedicated to this. And so what you said is like, oh, I've had it really good. I've had all these sort of like internet tools at my disposal. Of course, word of mouth, other bands, other musicians who are interested in this kind of thing. And of course, people like Chidi Kumar, who's a James Beard nominated chef whose background is in touring as a musician, people who make the transition. I think that's why it makes sense to marry, both subject matter so closely, but it was hard to figure out how to do it because so many people sort of float back and forth between the two. We haven't even talked about this, but, while I was in real estate and we were putting out our sort of breakthrough records, I was working front of house at Pies and Thighs in Brooklyn when they were newly at their new location. And I didn't even, it was just because like other musicians worked there.
That's Rushmore fried chicken at that place.
100%.
Still, like, to this day in the world.
100%. And, like, cool people were coming in, and I was having this, like, fun sort of front of house experience of working at, like, a hot New York City restaurant, and, like, and everybody I worked with was a musician, so there's all that crossover there, too.
Back to Pavement, I feel like, Malcolmus lived in Portland for a while and was always like around town at restaurants. Spiral Stairs, of course, likes music, likes food as well. And I feel like that's a band, and it's cool to hear Mark's story of how they use the guides. And Luke, working with Mark on this interview, and just Mark being in general one of the biggest real legit musicians who are into food. Tell me what it's like working with Mark on this piece and just like interacting with him. He seems like a fun hang. And if you go to Superior Burger, he will definitely sell you a drink like today because he's likely working right now.
Yeah, he was another person that going into this project was kind of a bucket list contributor. I really wanted to work with him. I had been reading his food writing since the early 2010s when he was Lucky Peach's Southeastern Pennsylvania correspondent.
Right.
So I knew that he had this kind of this food thing. He is such an interesting guy, super, super smart, and really engaged with food and really just knows a ton about food and is just so interested. And I remember actually after our initial call with him, I can't remember how this came up, but I shared with him that another one of my North Stars for this project is a collection of food essays written by war correspondents called Eating Mud Crabs in Kandahar. It's a really, really interesting anthology and was, again, the spirit of getting folks who don't always write about food to write food essays, and I really recommend that collection to anybody. But he wrote me back a week later and was like, "Hey man, I got that book. It's incredible."
Oh, cool.
I was like, how often when you recommend a book in passing to somebody, they actually go and get it and read it and tell you about it?
Yeah.
And I feel like that tells you all you need to know about Mark.
Let's talk about Chidi Kumar a little bit more. I think Chidi Kumar is like a well-regarded chef and restaurant owner and operates in the Research Triangle area,
Raleigh.
Raleigh, North Carolina. But also, I'd like to hear about Chidi Kumar's music because, and Alex, tell us a little bit about the bands that Chidi Kumar is in, because I think you have a great sense of how special it is to be at the top of your game in both fields.
Yeah, totally. And now I'm on my back foot here. Remind me the names of the bands.
Birds of Avalon.
Birds of Avalon. Yeah, I was going to say
Cherry
Birds
Valance.
of Maya because that's
Cherry Valance is what I know too.
Yeah. I mean, real rock and roll stuff. Like really, really just like excellent, true, like early 2000s, example of like great indie rock, emphasis on the rock, music. I first encountered Chidi just as a person who played King's in Raleigh. I actually was there, not, her restaurant beneath King's, Garland, isn't there anymore, but I played King's the other night with a different project, and I just, Chidi in the book talks about going on tour with Birds of Avalon and Cherry Valance and literally taking care of her bandmates and cooking for them and like realizing there that that's where she wanted to become a chef, which like, what a blessing to have a person like that in your band. There's some great stories about like, okay, I have, living on a shoestring budget, but like wanting to feed both herself and her bandmates and like just going above and beyond to like prep these meals. And then recognizing that, at least speaking in the United States, it's very difficult to stay well fed, however you want to think about that from a health perspective or even just a taste perspective. And opening a restaurant beneath a great venue in Raleigh that feeds bands really, really good food as a part of the deal of playing there. And this isn't like a huge fancy club. This is a 500 capacity sort of like dumpy, divey. I say that with love. It's a great venue, And I remember playing there and I remember not having, coming at this world more from an obsessive music space than I know the name of every chef in every city and just being, and like, almost as a nod to what's in every green room. It's like a joke now. It's like, oh, there's hummus, but this is fresh hummus with like really good crudité,
Yeah, and the
like,
pitas are from 50 miles away, and we drove there actually.
Totally, and
get
like
those
farmers market celery, and like fresh blended hummus that's warm that was like just made for you,
and some durian. Like they got like a little durian in the corner.
Totally,
they had brought from someone out.
Dude,
150 miles.
That would be
away.
an aggressive green room.
It would be, but it would be like part of this culture you're talking about, like how everyone is kind of into food.
So it's like, what's going on here? And it's like, oh, this came from the restaurant downstairs, and actually you get a voucher to eat there right before the show, and then just like what that does to you as an artist, what kind of frame of mind that puts you in to be like respected in that way. Cause good food is a sign of respect, as we all know. And it's like, oh, you take me seriously. You're offering, this is like, and then that kind of thing gets passed around. And have you ever played at King's? You get to go downstairs and eat at Garland, and like, it's this woman, and it makes complete sense to me that she understands the lifestyle and is like actively giving something back to the community.
I recognize this. My friend is a touring musician, has played Brooklyn Bowl a few times. And,
and
Brooklyn Bowl gives you this amazing spread typically, or gets you into the restaurant there. And I used to go to Brooklyn Bowl just for the food.
Totally. I mean, it's Blue Ribbon, and
Yeah.
and they just bring you menus, and they say order whatever you want, and it makes such a huge
There's
difference.
so few venues in the U.S. that do that.
It's crazy. And Luke, you write about in the book how this tradition is actually very common in Europe. And it sets the European tours apart from American tours. And talk about touring Europe and having, clubs like Alex, you're saying in North Carolina, but commonly having a restaurant nearby or taking you out for a proper meal.
Yeah, there's a few different ways it manifests in Europe, but generally you're dealing with promoters who are a lot more hands-on, and so they will like physically take you to eat somewhere. And I mean, we have one of our contributors, Andre Gomes from Portugal, is one of these incredible promoters who take such good care of the bands who come through and play. I haven't had the pleasure of playing one of his shows, but Alex
I'll tell you,
has.
I didn't even play.
Yeah, he just.
I went to Porto as a tourist, and the man told me exactly where to eat, which was incredible, and then eventually just took me into his home and cooked for me.
They just make it is their mission to make sure you're well fed.
So
it's just
cool.
such a part of every Schengen culture that you're gonna get taken care of there. But then some places, like specifically in France, the venues will have kitchens and they'll have chefs who work at the venue. They're hired for that night to cook for the bands, and it's fantastic food. They clearly have a pretty solid budget for hospitality, and it's just because there's great arts funding in Europe, honestly. And
yeah, the government really does step in, and you see it everywhere in festivals or in touring, and that's how Europe rolls in many ways. Luke, I have to take this advantage to talk about music. I rarely get to do it on the show, but we have a shared love for broadcast. Long live Trish Keenan.
That's
and
right.
This year marks the release of 2 demos, compilations. The latest one is Distant Call, collected demos from 2000 to 2006, which is being released later this month in September. Why is broadcast so important to you?
Yeah, we could do a whole episode.
We could do
about
drum sounds, to be honest.
I mean, so yeah, the drumming in broadcast. I mean, and I'm not sure that's something that is commonly talked about.
Yeah, it's not. But we're going there.
It's fabulous. I mean, I came up playing jazz, and I think they haven't had the same drummer throughout their whole lifespan, but specifically the Ha Ha Sound era drummer, Neil Bullock. This was in, I think, 2003 to 5 ish. Fabulous jazz guy, adds so much to their sound. But the guy before him, Steve Perkins, also had a jazz background.
And he was on Noise Made by People, I would imagine. And that album was their breakout. And I remember I was an intern at Spin Magazine in 2000, and that album was like on all the time. People love that album.
It's just so, I mean, it's so like transporting, and it just creates like a whole atmosphere around it. Like creates this like bubble around you. If you're listening to it walking down the street, like you're not on the street that you're on anymore. I listened to them a lot. So I started listening to them in high school, but I listened to them a lot when I lived in London for grad school, and it just matched. I just said you're not on the street, you're on. When you're in London, you're really there, and it amplifies the kind of British surrounding. So it was a really like that, I don't know, that time in my life I really kind of grew up and became an adult, and that was the soundtrack, and I feel like it's very important to me for that reason. And also just, I don't know, just a fantastic band.
Yeah, Trish Keenan too, as a vocalist, her performance on these albums is underrated, and I think she sings like with a pretty narrow range, but it's just beautiful. It's a real
and
organ.
Haunting, and like haunting now, but haunting then too.
Yeah, and she passed really unfortunately super at a young age.
Yeah.
And that was a terrible loss for music. So we get to go a little music. I want to talk about Beefheart though, because honestly, we can't just leave
Haunting.
You mentioned Beefheart.
I did. I'm a huge broadcast fan also. So
oh, sorry.
No, don't be sorry. You guys covered it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not like the world's foremost Beefheart scholar, but Trout, Mask, Replica, Safe as Milk were the ones that came to me first as like I'm in college, and so I don't listen to directly poppy things anymore.
Yeah.
That period.
Totally.
And that was kind of my introduction to Beefheart, which is funny because it's incredibly difficult music.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really cool, but it's really difficult. And then like more recently getting into records like Clear Spot that just have these like incredible pop songs on them. And I'm gonna like out myself a little bit here, but I was like, oh, nobody told me there was all this. There was all this like soulful, incredible Beefheart. So there's a lot to keep uncovering.
When a band can have multiple eras before the eras became a thing is pretty rad. I'm going to close and ask a little bit about your projects musically and otherwise. And Alex, first to you. You're heading out on tour with Real Estate this year. It looks like you have some great shows. And what city are you most looking forward to visiting for a meal?
Well, I mean, I've got a European tour coming up that starts a week from today. I'll be in Paris the day that the book comes out, that seems fitting. That's incredible. I mean, it's a cliche, but I almost feel like I need to go to La Coupole to celebrate, which is where Chris Franz goes in the book and talks about that meal with the Ramones. But I mean, we're also traveling to Southeast Asia and to some places I've never been before. Luke mentioned Jakarta. And then actually my wife's coming out to meet me. We're going to spend a little extra time in Indonesia. So I'm really, really looking forward to eating over there. Yeah.
And shout out to the Woods' Festival in upstate New York.
Absolutely.
Really cool.
How's the food up there?
It's great. It's great. There were really good food vendors. I played the Woods Festival last year. It's at Arrowwood Farms, which is it's a really nice brewery, and they had a lot of really good local food vendors. There were like smoked oysters and stuff. Like it was solid. Yeah,
it's well regarded festival in late summer in Hudson Valley. And Luke, what's up with you? You got we don't have any stories on.
Let's fix that.
I know we got to have a little riff about what you're going to write next for Taste, because I've been really enjoying working with you in Taste, but you've got other projects you're working on.
Yeah, let's see. My next piece is going to come out. I just wrote this article about Jamaican soup called fish tea.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very Jamaican cuisine minded.
Yeah.
Lauren is half Jamaican. It's a big part of what we eat at home. But yeah, it's a soup that doesn't get a lot of play in American food media. I went deep on fish tea. And I'm excited to share that. It was a cool piece to work on, and got some other articles brewing right now. No touring for me, as I said. Strictly retired, but
you're going on book tour.
Little bit of book tour.
Yeah,
bit of book touring.
Book tour can be fun.
I'm actually also going to France next week. Lauren was invited to participate in an illustration festival, and I'm tagging along. So,
look, yeah, that's wonderful.
It's not going to work out though, right? We're not going to be there at the same time.
Unfortunately, no.
Really
but it's funny. I mean, we didn't talk about this, and we won't get into it. But Lyon is the site of my worst ever meal on tour, so I'm excited to get a do-over.
Yeah, we didn't get into the worst, but yeah, let's just.
It's better though. I don't want to. We're
not going to end it with the worst.
No.
I was going to do best and worst, but back that would be like the typical food music guy question, so I'm not going to do that. Yeah.
Right.
So Luke, you've answered this before. You've been on the show and you'll be back. So I'm going to just ask Alex,
please.
On This Is Taste, we ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close the interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. The best fruit.
Really ripe Santa Rosa plum.
I love the terroir. I love the location.
Yeah.
But plums are hard to find. What makes it good?
This is a personal preference, but I like them cold.
Yeah.
And it's just like the combination of sweetness and tartness, and there's a textural thing. I like them slightly overripe. I like it like sort of dripping down my wrist.
Oh yeah,
the sort of
over
like
the sink, baby.
The ruby red interior of a plum. Some people like them a little bit more sour. What can I say? I'm a sweet man. The rareness, I think, is part of it for me. It's like you bite into a plum that good, it has to be July or August. And
you're so California
it's summer. But I love them always on the East Coast.
Oh,
I loved like a black plum. And it meant my summer birthday. It meant like as a kid, the summer was coming up, and then I moved to California and was like, oh, this is where they're like actually really good.
Right. I definitely agree with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, the worst vegetable.
This is hard. I'm like such an omnivore. I would have a hard time telling you a food that I don't like. I guess I don't love like plain celery on its own. It's a little too fibrous for me. Celery is a vehicle for stuff. I'm down, but just like
eating it plain.
Folks, some people, there was a hot celery boom a couple of years ago. It was like really expensive, Yeah. I'm just saying, that's the vegetable on its own. Sort of exactly who's eating it plain.
Yeah.
That says it all.
All right. The best dessert.
I'm a sucker for anything that combines chocolate and banana.
Interesting combo, and I don't mean interesting in a judgmental way. I think it's hard to pull off.
Yeah, so, I think it's really good when it's done right. I love it. I'm a banana freak.
Do you like the Ben & Jerry's version of that?
I like this. That's like Chunky Monkey.
Chunky Monkey, yeah.
I don't like nuts in my ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
I love ice cream, but get those nuts out of there.
Yeah, I agree fully. Yeah, butter pecan never really did for me when it had the chopped up nuts on it, but I like that call. Okay, the New York City restaurant you visit first in an ideal world.
Honestly, I mean, I haven't even lived in New York since the new Superiority Burger opened, and I feel like I've been there like 6 or 7 times, so that should tell you a lot.
Yeah, you've answered it, man. I mean, it's a terrific place. All right, what's your bodega snack grab?
It's like, this might lead into what I think is coming, but like, if I'm being really indulgent, it's like a chicken cutlet sandwich with like which is a little bit more than a snack,
No.
but like cutlet with like some honey mustard dressing on there, maybe even fresh mozzarella if I'm getting really spicy.
Is that your favorite sandwich as well?
That is not my favorite sandwich,
That
but
is
like,
not
but
your
I
favorite
think of that as a bodega sandwich in a weird way.
Word.
Yeah.
No, cutlets are,
Yeah.
if you have the right deli,
Yeah.
it's a
exactly.
risk to
Yeah.
order.
I think you got to know what you're getting into. Either it's your corner spot or the one a few blocks from you that is where you go for sandwiches. You know what I mean? But if there's a decent deli counter, that's what because I want to talk not just like prepackaged foods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you hydrate when you're playing? Do you have a beverage that you prefer while playing?
I do have waters on stage. I will say I've stopped doing this, but and I kind of like cringe when I look back, but I'll talk about it because it's funny. I used to bring a bottle of Jameson out on stage with me as like a child, as like a 25-year-old child, and drink it from the bottle, and the audience would go nuts.
Yeah.
And I'm like a big Leo clap for me energy. So I was getting bad positive reinforcement on bad behavior, and I have since stopped. It's a little more funny. The book is very much not like that, by the way, but I will drop that I used to do stupid stuff.
I didn't know you did that.
Very unreal. By the time we toured together,
I was going to say, it doesn't sound
that.
like you to me.
Yeah, straight from the bottle is definitely
ridiculous.
A 20 thing.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
But now it's definitely a lot of water on stage. Some LaCroix. If I really want to change it up.
At Joyland in Jakarta, there's going to be flats of Pocari Sweat backstage.
Oh,
Love that.
No better on-stage drink than
man.
Pocari Sweat.
Yeah,
and that's also what I drink when I play tennis, if I can.
Oh, Pocari all the way.
Unbelievable.
Pocari a lot. I love that.
When I turn pro, that's who's going to sponsor me.
Every once in a while, we've got Harmless Harvest coconut water in the green room, and
very hydrating.
that's quite hydrating.
That's a nice treat. Your favorite cookbook of all time?
I'm gonna say the Moosewood Cookbook, just for pure California pilled, vibe.
Yeah. Like that. That's a good Bible for plant-based and vegetarian cooking.
Totally.
Love that. Last one. We're gonna get to it now. Your favorite sandwich.
Well, this is the really long answer because I'm a sandwich guy, and I think I have to start this by saying that I grew up in New Jersey. I did live in Philadelphia for a year. I think Philadelphia is perhaps the sandwich capital of America. And I got a lot of incredible Italian subs while I was in Philadelphia, and more specific cheesesteaks that I could go on about forever. So I can't pick just one. I do want to highlight, there are sandwiches from my youth. There was a deli called Taste of Italy in Ridgewood, New Jersey that in some ways, I don't even know if it's the best one, but it will live as the best kind of Italian sandwich shop in my memory. But I want to highlight a place that I found. This will give you a sort of a window into what kind of food person I am, or what really gets me going. I found a place while I was having my a routine service done on my car near where I live in California. This is in a town called San Rafael. It's called Viking Submarine Shop. I actually texted Luke while I was there.
I was just going to say,
I was flipping out. Yeah, so. And part of it is because I live in California, but I really miss the East Coast approach to sandwich making. I don't need sprouts on everything. I love sprouts, but you
need a really hardcore
I need something that's bad for me.
Yeah.
But I don't need that, but I enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I'm in this, and I just got this feeling. I was like, what is this place? It's weirdly too big for its needs. It's this sort of cavernous room with one little sandwich counter, and it's all the mechanics are hanging out there and eating. It's literally a kind of lunch counter spot. And I'm in there and I'm looking at the sandwiches, I'm looking at the menu, and it's all the kind of typical sub shop stuff that you might expect. And then I noticed that there's udon on the menu. I was looking at them, and I was like, these folks are Japanese, actually. I can tell. And they make udon, which is I'm always interested if I'm at a diner, but there's Indian food on the menu. It's that's probably good. So I decided to split the difference, and they had a beef teriyaki sub option.
Oh.
And it was beef teriyaki prepared kind of like a French dip or a cheesesteak, very thinly sliced, kind of chop steak, teriyaki seasoning. And they didn't totally scoop the roll, but they hollowed it out largely to create this kind of, it was almost as if the sub formed a wrap. It was this hot cylinder of a burrito, which I thought was just a very culinary move.
Yeah.
It's kind of oh, this is an unassuming place that it's just a local spot that is legendary, you know, and like I'm eating something so surprising and so delicious that I was like, I like texted several people, like East Coast expats that live in my area that was like, dude, I found it. We're going here.
We're going here. We have the spot now.
Yeah.
Can we go?
We can absolutely go.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. Alex Bleeker and Luke Pyenson, thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.